there's going to be someone who is always going to have a darker, kinkier side or have more pain tolerance than you. And your goal isn't to try to match that person. It's trying to have your own experience that makes you feel super embodied and super powerful.
Hello, friend, and welcome to the Sex Upgraded podcast, a podcast for men all about sex, where we'll combine real, authentic, and down-to-earth conversations about sex, life, and relationships with some pretty wild personal stories and practical how-to episodes as well, with guest experts from around the world to help you have the most amazing sex life you can possibly have. My name is Taylor, and I'll be your host on this journey, and it's my goal with each episode to give you practical, actionable things you can start doing today to improve your sex life and your entire life, because a thriving sex life will help you thrive in all areas of your life. So let's begin today's episode by starting with a deep breath in through the nose into the belly together. Exhaling with an audible sigh. And let's get into today's episode. Today, we get to talk about BDSM, Dom-Sub dynamics, black leather or not, all those kinds of things. And I'm joined here by my friend Andre today. Andre, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Andre recently led a 4-week intro to BDSM class here in Asheville, and some of my friends took it. I was thinking about taking it, but I was going to be out of town for half of the classes, so it seemed like that would have been a silly idea. But
Yeah.
I'll take the next round.
Yeah, there'll be another.
Yeah, but I heard some good things. And I wanted to have you on the podcast to talk about this.
Sure.
So welcome.
Thank you.
And who are you? How did you get here? What's a little bit of your backstory?
Yeah. So backstory is long. But it really started when I was leaving the military. I was in the Marines.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that I had this desire to go beyond what I knew, not just in sexuality, but what I could do as a career.
Mm.
And being in the military 8 years, I learned so many great lessons. One of them being that I have a very strong, domineering side to myself. I was an officer, so I had to take charge in pretty high-risk situations. And thinking how I could marry that to my hypersexuality. I've known for many years, even before the military, that sex and intimacy and embodiment have been such a mainstay in the way that I connect.
Mm.
And as I transitioned out of the military, worked in the corporate world for a little bit, I was finding that I was having these very intimate, erotic experiences with lovers, and how they were not just what would be a physical experience, but they turned out to be quite healing for them. And they said, I need to do this for a living. So I have to thank all of the people who, pushed me to go into this work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I am here today, is just the experience that I've had, the teachers that I've had,
Mm-hmm.
both professionally as well as personally, and getting to be here in Asheville, holding this first of many iterations of workshops has been such a blessing. And being able to meet individuals like yourself and talk about this great subject as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
So military man turned BDSM explorer turned BDSM teacher, sex practitioner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the things. I like to say that I'm a master of none, but really just a proficient in many. And that helps me to also keep my mind open to the things that I don't know. And so I'm constantly a student in this world. And if you know anything about BDSM, you'll meet people who have been doing this for decades, and people who are just starting. And on each of those ends of those spectrum, you'll find that there's still something to be learned, even the people who've been doing it for decades.
Yeah, which is a perfect intro to this podcast, because it would be my hope that somebody at the beginning of their journey with BDSM could learn something from this, and somebody 10, 15 years in could also get a useful nugget.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's one thing you said up front that I'd like to touch on before we get into things, and that you mentioned the word hypersexuality in reference to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that sometimes I have even used the word hypersexuality with almost like a negative connotation to describe if somebody is too maybe even distracted by sex or focused on sex so much that it actually detracts from their ability to be productive or have useful relationships. But I'm curious, in the context that you used it, could you elaborate?
Sure.
What does that mean to you?
I celebrate the fact that I am a hypersexual being, because what it allows me to do is go down different rabbit holes of my own research and education to understanding sexuality. So yeah, I could see the other side of the coin where it's saying, because I'm a hypersexual being, I could be very distracted by sex, or that is like my priority in the way that I connect with people. But for myself, what it's done is it actually allows me to research and learn more about sexuality. So that's where the hyper piece comes in, because we're taught very little about sex in our education, and we're not encouraged to go out and learn more about it. It's generally some form of abstinence training or some form of contraception, waiting till marriage, all of these different things. But tapping into pleasure, tapping into our own eroticism, tapping into that power is something we're not taught. So hypersexuality for myself has given me the tools to want to go down those rabbit holes of learning. And can it, turn into something where it becomes a priority? Sure. And that's also part of the shadow work that I do, is like understanding, why do we have these urges, these sensations, and how can we use them to our benefit, where it doesn't have to go into a physical sexual space. We can use that energy for other things.
Totally. Well, it sounds like you're using the word in the context that I would describe as like a healthy, integrated way to approach sexuality.
Yeah, I would agree.
It'll make me reconsider or ponder my semantic word usage. But to start the conversation, before we get into things like how to be a good dom and how to hold space and and how to spank people and all that good stuff, I'd love to just talk about some of the misconceptions of BDSM, because I've heard all kinds of stuff from people over the years. People saying like, "Oh, it's BDSM. It's only people who wear leather and spikes and they cut each other with knives." Or
I thought that too.
Yeah,
I've definitely been there.
Yeah, or BDSM is only people who have some sort of mental disorder or something's wrong with them, and they only can access sex through this because they're broken, or things like that. So I wonder if you could speak to that. What are some of the more common misconceptions?
I mean, I feel like you spoke to most, which is great.
What do you have to say about that?
But yeah, I think I'll first start explaining like BDSM. So for those who are unaware, BDSM is an acronym that was really created late 70s, early 80s, and it discusses bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, sadism, masochism. And all of those have their own individual definitions of what those are. And when we're talking about that, the misconceptions really come from just understanding, when you research those words, what it means and how it can be a daunting, sometimes even scary, avenue to go down if you're not familiar with or understand what these terms mean or how to engage with it in a safe and healthy practice. So one of the big misconceptions, like you said, is like chains or spikes or these torture devices, which are part of the world, part of the BDSM lifestyle, and it's not the only thing, or it's not absolutely necessary to bring those elements in to really have a beautiful, connected BDSM scene or play or experience. So when I say scene or play, that's generally how we talk about a very orchestrated, connected, intimate physical experience between one or two or many people.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So a BDS, what we're doing right now. So a BDSM scene could be you and I are role playing a podcast, and we have all the equipment out, and this is us, playing the host and then the guest.
Mm-hmm.
And then somewhere along the way, we've discussed this
Mm-hmm.
through consent, through conversation, through negotiation, that I'm going to start to woo you and bring you into a more physical space. And maybe under the desk, I've got some form of tool, and you don't know what that tool is. And whatever I bring out, you're going to have to be a good little boy and do exactly what I say. Made that all up in 2 seconds, which shows that you have really so much room to like go into this space. So that's kind of like an example of a scene.
So it sounds like a scene is basically just you're going into an agreement with somebody about something that you're going to experience, and it could be anything, and you could orchestrate really anything you wanted.
Absolutely. And the reason we term it, or I term it, a scene, or that it's termed in the BDSM lifestyle as a scene, because you have a really structured start and an end. So similar to like a movie scene, there's going to be a place where you're beginning, where there's like some form of climax, and then there's the end or the aftercare. Very similar to what would be any form of traditional lovemaking as well. However, there might be more elements of discussion because you're bringing in things that might bring up emotions. So that's kind of what a scene is. But, with the misconceptions is, you have to be tortured, like inward, like you have to have some form of darkness. You have to wear dark clothing. You have to like go into these hard hitting, bonded experiences. And again, all of those are very possible. But if that's completely outside of your comfort zone, there's still a lot of really fun that you can do within that space, but not everyone knows that. So you hear about these dungeons, you hear about these gatherings that have, BDSM furniture, like the St. Andrew's cross or a cage. And you're like, oh, I can't go there. That's not my thing. Perfectly fine if it's not. And you can also go to these experiences and not participate at all. And you can just watch and you can learn. So really doing your homework on BDSM is the first step.
Sounds like it's a spectrum.
Yes,
very much. You have the St. Andrew's cross over here on this one side, and then on the other side, what are some examples of less intense, you could call it,
sure,
type BDSM?
So sensation play. So we were talking about the workshop. I had one whole day of the workshop focused on sensation play. And if you've ever done anything with touch, whether it be like physical, one person touching another, or having some form of blanket on you that was really like soft and velvety, that's, being stroked across your skin, all of that is sensation play. And sensation play falls under the umbrella of what is BDSM. So you don't have to have a whip. You don't have to be tortured. You don't have to wear like hot leather. We were talking about that earlier. Like leather is not my friend. It's super hot and it doesn't work for me. It works for other people. But you can take away all of those elements. And as long as you're having a connected experience with someone where you're feeling a sensation, and it could be fear, it could be excitement, it could be nervousness. But if you're able to share that with someone and have an agreed upon like climactic experience that will bring you just a place where you get to go beyond what you normally know or do, that's BDSM.
I like that. The cheeky part of me when you were speaking just now is thinking like, all the love and light people who've tickled each other with feathers who think BDSM is for people where you've done BDSM.
It's true. But it's funny you say that because like you said, like the love and light or, generally like maybe more tantric focused practitioners, the individuals who might be more called to go that route for healing experiences or exploration might poo-poo BDSM or might say, oh, that's not my thing. The same as on the other side with individuals who are more guided towards like a more focused BDSM lifestyle. As soon as you mention Tantra or Love and Light, they're like, that's not my thing. That's not why I'm here. I'm here for this. So it's interesting how both of these, worlds actually are quite connected, because as much as the individuals who are more geared towards BDSM are trying to avoid Tantra or Love and Light or woo-woo-ness, it's really baked into the lifestyle as well. It's really how you're connecting to the experience is the most important.
Yeah, as you were speaking just now, I was seeing threads from both of those things lining up and weaving together. Like in tantric practice and a lot of you could call it new age spiritual sexual explorations.
Yeah.
Like one of the biggest things that people are cultivating is actually a deeper sense of presence and connection with people. Maybe they're doing breath work, maybe they're doing visualizations or something, but a lot of it is really focused on trying to be here and present in the now.
Well said.
And it sounds like, and in my experiences with BDSM too, there's a massive amount of focus on creating a container that's safe as possible, using communication and agreements, potentially safe words, et cetera, so that there can actually be an experience of deep presence.
Absolutely.
And deep surrender, deep pleasure in the moment.
Yes.
And in the moment, pleasure and experience, like that's a crossover point.
And I'm so glad that you brought up presence, because that really is one of the defining moments, like the connectedness. Safety is huge, as you mentioned. Like having that conversation, you should be having conversations with someone before you go into any form of physical experience. It might be even a hug. Before you just go in on someone and like hug them because you're just meeting them, you might want to ask like, hey, are you a handshaker? Are you a hugger? Because a hug to someone who just had a deeply traumatic experience could be super triggering and activating. And you, while that wasn't your intention, could very well be a part of why that activation happened. So even anytime I meet anyone, even if it's someone that I've only, I've met a few times and I might have hugged them other times, I might check in if I see them kind of going through a tough time. I'm just, how are you right now? Like, how can I support you? Would you like a hug? Yeah. And a lot of people actually say, actually, I'm good right now. Yeah. So whether it's going into a very shadowy BDSM scene or, greeting someone the first time, safety conversation is so vitally important.
Yeah. Note to everybody living in Asheville or Austin or Hawaii or any of these sort of like conscious community hotspots. I mean, many times I've met somebody and I'll even potentially be reaching out my hand or even in inquiry around, what are we going to do? Are we going to do a handshake or hug? And the person's already coming at me with arms open quickly, hugging around me before I've said anything.
Yeah.
And like that's not particularly activating for me, but I could see very well how it would be for some people. And some people don't shower, and then that's a whole other story, which is a tangent. Maybe we won't go down right now. But
we could go down a long tangent on that one, but yeah. But I'm glad you shared that, because the reason that I do that practice is because it happened to me. I gave someone a hug. This happened many years ago when I was in San Francisco. I gave someone a hug, and I immediately felt him tense up. And I asked him, "Oh, are you okay?" Like, "Oh, I didn't want that." I said, "Oh, the hug. Yeah, I didn't want that." Like, "Oh, I'm very sorry. At that point, I had never even thought about that."
Yeah.
Like, I actually like to be asked, because I have a lot of trauma around physical touch from a man. And this was to someone who identified as a woman. And I said, "Thank you so much for sharing that with me. I'm going to sit with this." And I did. And lo and behold, I ran into so many other experiences where I was thanked for asking, because there's always that assumption that touch is just the way that everyone wants to be greeted. And like you, I'm not activated by it. I love touch, but everyone has a different story.
Totally. We all do. So one of your days was about sensation play.
Yeah.
Was one of your days about Dom sub dynamics?
It was, actually.
Can we talk about that?
That was the first day, the intro to kind of the umbrella of what is BDSM. And I definitely will be doing more workshops and realizing that there's not enough hours to talk about this subject or to put into practice, which I really enjoyed about this workshop was we actually got hands-on. And while we talked a little bit, make sure we had the foundation we went into a lot of the exercises and demonstration on how to properly go into these spaces so that you feel like you're, you have the confidence to be able to perform in a way that feels safe for you. But yeah, so we actually talked about, and while Dom and Sub were part of those elements, we talked about D-type and S-type roles. So D-type are the ones that where someone is more in the dominant position or the one providing the experience. And then your S-type are the more submissive roles and the ones that are more receiving. So within D-types, you have top, and these are general definitions, and everyone will have different ones, but you have top, you have dominant or dom, and then you have master. And then with S-type, you have bottom, you have submissive or sub, and then slave. So in the rankings of these, each of these have a certain amount of power exchange that happens within the element. So I'll start with the D-type. So when you look at top versus a dom, in a top role, you might be curating an experience, you might be in charge of that experience, but once that scene or play experience ends, you might not be going into other forms of power with the individual that you were playing with in that moment. You might both go your separate ways. Even if you're in a partnership, there's not something that bleeds over into your everyday life. That's where like being a dom or being a dominant comes in. There's more of a power exchange where that dominant might have more control over their sub even after a scene. So now, what someone's wearing when they go out to eat, like that might not be in the realm of the agreement that a top had, but a dom might. Now we're talking about master. And this is where you hear like the 24/7 DS type relationship where that sub is doing absolutely nothing without the permission or agreed upon permission in a contract from that master. So those are the D types. And then the S types are basically the opposite of that: bottom, sub, slave. So we often hear about dom and sub, and that's where a lot of our focus is. And someone might say, oh yeah, I'm a dom, or yeah, I'm a sub. And then when you start asking questions and you start finding out, oh, well, it sounds like maybe you're more of a bottom, or maybe you're more of a top. And all of these are labels. These are labels to help us better understand, just like BDSM is a label, but really finding out what being a dom means to you. And it might not be this thing that you want to have control over for hours upon hours after a very embodied, sexy scene. You might want to stop right after that scene ends and go back to your everyday life. You might be more of a top. So that's where we talked about like the elements of dom and sub dynamics.
Very interesting. I've never heard this before, actually. Super interesting to me.
Yeah.
Like I've heard some of these terms, but not in this particular context of being the 3 under the D and 3 under the S. And for some people listening right now, well, there's two directions I want to go. But first, to touch on the master slave components, roles, I recognize those words might be activating for some people. And so there's a desire to just at least briefly go into those. And I will say, I imagine, it's my understanding that people choose to do these things with, consent, and they get joy or pleasure out of the experience.
Yes. Right. And I'm glad that you brought that up. I'll admit that even those words for myself can be activating, just from, again, my own learning and unlearning of our history. When I say ours, like in the United States alone.
Yeah.
But yeah, all of these roles, to include someone wanting to be a slave or someone wanting to be a master, are agreed upon after a long discussion. These are ones that could last weeks or months before they actually take on these roles. It might involve a contract. My partner that I have been with for 9 years, we actually started our relationship in a DS relationship where we had a contract, where we had an agreed upon terms so that we knew where the left and right lateral limits were for how we engage each other and what rewards were baked in if she was a good girl and the punishment when she was not. And we put the role of master and slave in there because at some point there was just a desire from someone to be completely taken care of, where they didn't want any form of control. And that word happened to be what was most relevant, and it's stuck around. There's many other terms that people use nowadays, but it's still one that people will bring in because that's where they feel most held, where they feel like they can mostly surrender and just let go into the experience. So if it is triggering for you, or that's not what you want in your dynamic, you don't have to have it. It's completely okay to decide what works for you and what does not.
Yeah, even potentially using a different word choice.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I want to hear more about your relationship, or at least some examples of like, what are the edges? What are the lateral limits, and just personalize it a little bit, give some context to things.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that question. So where my relationship is today is much different than where we started. Where we started was a deep desire to explore this world. And when I say the world of like BDSM dynamics, BDSM lifestyle, and we brought in all forms of toys and tools and role play and edging and experiences that we knew how to navigate really well, and experiences that we made a lot of mistakes in and had to like come back to the drawing board and see how to improve in the future. And how that relationship with my partner after like 9 years has evolved is I still do this work, professionally. I also have lovers where she and I are in an open relationship. So I have lovers that I get to explore these elements with because they're interested and they want to. I would say my partner currently has been moving more away from her desire to explore BDSM dynamics in general. There are times she enjoys shibari, kimbaku, which are the art of Japanese knots and rope tying. And so there's still elements that intrigue her, but right now that's not really where her energy's at. So how we interact as a partnership evolves, and which is a great segue to say that wherever you are starting your BDSM exploration, or wherever you're at, you mentioned the people who've been doing this for decades, they've shifted. Like what they've wanted and desired in some form of fashion have changed because we're ever-changing beings. And what turns us on today will most likely be different 6 months or a year from now. So being able to be open to that change is very important, especially if you're someone who is in one of the more D-type roles, because part of your, the role in what that you're playing is being a caretaker, being a provider, being the one who knows how to guide the person that you're with. And if that person is having a tough time or is wanting to shift the dynamic, and you're maybe being hard-headed or not wanting to be open to that, are you really holding that role in the most conscious or healthy way? So change is a big part of this, and where we started as a relationship to where we are now has changed more than 30 times that I can even think about.
For sure. That's a lot of years.
Yeah.
a lot of years to be in a relationship. So to me, seems like there's a lot to play these roles well. If you're in a dom sub type role, top, bottom, whatever words you're using, there's a lot of care there. There's a lot of presence and there's a lot of intentionality in an ideal world, right? Like if we're doing these things properly with consent. And so
absolutely, what
I've heard and experienced in my brief experiences exploring BDSM is that I've usually been the top. I think, that's the term I'll use for right now.
Okay. Yeah.
And I know I'll notice in my partners that they're like in that context, they're able to surrender and release and relax like potentially more deeply than ever before because they don't have to make decisions.
Yeah.
They don't have to make decisions at all. Their actions are controlled either by my words or by my hands. Like I'll actually move them into places and just control their body, obviously with consent and with whatever boundaries we've set up front. But to witness that sort of deep surrender in somebody is really beautiful. And it also feels very tender and precious and like, wow, I would not want to fuck that up.
Yeah.
You know, because that's like a very vulnerable state.
Absolutely.
As well. Yeah. But it seems like a really beautiful, potent exchange.
And I think something you said that I want to bring back is like the tenderness. And this is where I feel the people who have been exploring BDSM and have found a good home with it and have found experience will know this well. And those who are somewhat new or those who might think that they know but aren't incorporating this aspect might need some further education is the importance of aftercare, the importance of checking in during an experience, and the importance of a really intentional negotiation beforehand. Because there's going to be moments where someone who is fully surrendering might go into a deep space of disassociation. So bottom drops, subspace, these are words that talk about an experience that people have when they are taken into a very embodied experience that can actually take them out of their body because they've released so much endorphins within something being done to them, said to them, and it can be very psychedelic. Like I've had a client where we were on a couch afterwards. This is after about 4.5 hours. And she was just looking at me with like a smile and her head cocked to the side. And I was checking in. I said, how are you feeling? She was telling me how I looked like a Maori like tribesman. I had all of these tattoos all over my face. And then I was like, my eyes were black and they were glowing, but she wasn't scared. But she had never experienced something like this before. So the tenderness comes into knowing how you can check in and properly hold that person who is trusting you. Like all of this is hugely built on trust, trusting you to hold them in a time when things might not go exactly the way you planned. Do you have the skill and the experience to be able to take someone back from a place of maybe some fear or anxiety to let them know that they're safe in this experience, in their body, with you? And it might be that you have to stop the scene. It might be that you have to, all the other things that you had planned that you were really excited about doing, you have to put to the side and check in and take care of that person. So tenderness is a huge point that comes up, and making sure that you have these safeguards in place for when things don't go the way that you had planned.
Yeah. That seems super important. There's multiple skill sets to develop here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Communication, repair, ability to repair, ability to let go of any attachments for your own desired outcome if the moment supersedes it, for sure.
Yeah.
All these different things.
Knowing as much as I can say I'm a very skilled practitioner in this world, I still make mistakes. And I have to have repair conversations. I have to have after action discussions to see what went well or where were like ways we could have communicated better so that the times of like activation or triggering can be better held for the future. Yeah. Like this is definitely not a world you want to just jump into without any form of like research, education, practice. Like you're not going to get good at the BDSM lifestyle just by reading. You have to actually practice it. You have to sometimes take chances. And that's where the conversations come in to say, if we get to a point where something, goes awry, how do we come back from that?
Yeah. So it sounds like there's almost, maybe we could say BDSM light and then BDSM. So for example, I've done one BDSM workshop I went to around Dom Sub Dynamics in Asheville, I think a year and a half ago.
What was that like for you?
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. I'll share that in a second.
Okay.
But the piece I was going to say is that I've experimented with handcuffs, and I have this rope restraint thing under my bed that comes up around both sides to where I can strap down my partner, spread eagle on the bed, and I can do it in a way where they don't necessarily see that it's there up front, you know? And so I've done all those things without actually creating a scene, you could say, like without having the specific conversation with my partners that we're going to do that in that particular moment. We've had other conversations up front around how we're going to interact sexually, et cetera. And we know that kind of thing is okay. And so I'm thinking, okay, that's maybe BDSM light. Maybe you're playing with some impact play, which could be spanking, slapping, et cetera. Maybe you could tie each other up on a bed, and maybe you don't make the whole agreement of a scene or something. But then sounds like there's another world of possibility that has even more potential to it if we were to actually create a whole agreement around what a scene might look like role play, identity play, like all of this kind of stuff, right?
I think it's important though, like you said something that I want to make sure that I address, which is like you might not have had like the agreement of going into what is a scene, and you're bringing in elements of like restraining, or you're bringing in elements of spanking or flogging. And especially for beginners, I want to make sure that I emphasize this, that even if you've played with someone 10, 15, 20 times, assuming that all of the things that you've done during those times are still on the table for the 21st time that you're about to go into, this is where I see a lot of people kind of getting themselves into, deep water or challenging experiences, because you might have been okay, spanking someone a week ago, but now you come back and maybe they fell and they hurt themselves, and you start hitting them and you're damaging their skin even more, or something traumatic happened to them between that time of meeting, and now that being spanked is now an activating moment for them.
For sure.
So it's important for individuals to have at least a check-in. If you know that you want to bring in elements of tying someone to a bed or a flogger or any form of like hot or cold play or bringing in candle wax, is a quick, even a couple minutes, hey, why don't we spice things up tonight? I'd like to do this, 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 and this to you. How does that sound? And you can still maintain some of the intrigue and some of the spontaneity. And you're also protecting yourself from getting yourself into hot water. Like
totally. And hurting them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It occurred to me while you were saying that all of those examples that I referenced, we had talked about doing those specific things at a different point. And yes, there was interest and like generalized consent to do those things. And I noticed in thinking about it, in those experiences, I was constantly tracking them too, like hypervigilance to see, are they enjoying this? Is their body showing any sign of tension or contraction, or is their presence, are they dissociating at all?
Yeah.
Constantly checking in. Compare that to some other times where I have gone through the effort and labor up front to create a scene with somebody. And we say, oh, we actually want to have this very specific experience at this specific time. And we set all these agreements, we set a safe word, and then in that context, like there's less hypervigilance on my part because I understand the edges and I understand the boundaries, and they understand the edges and the boundaries, so we can go more fully into the roles. Maybe I would slap them harder, or maybe I would tie them down tighter or be more rough with them when I'm spreading their arms out and holding them down, sort of a thing, because in that particular moment, we've had those conversations. Yeah. And so, appreciating the difference in the freedom and the openness that could create.
And that comes a lot with, experience of playing with someone over and over and over. And it might be that you have this agreement to say, I'm allowed to bring in all of these new elements without having to ask, because we've already agreed upon that earlier on. And it's up to the other individual. Like there's two, maybe more, but generally at least two people who are going to be part of an experience. And while the person in the D role, the dom, the top, might be in a way in charge, that sub or bottom has just as much power and control, maybe even more, because they get to be the one to raise the flag and say, I'm done. I don't want this anymore. And if you're playing in a conscious space, that dom or top, they're stopping. So having those conversations and allowing for that room to be explored in a general way over and over and over is really, I'm happy to hear like you have that intuition to be able to look upon someone and check in and scan their body and see where they're at. But you're also a very skilled individual yourself, and individuals who might not have known how to do this or knew, it's important to like learn these tricks of the trade.
Totally. Yeah, for sure. I take for granted that I have received a lot of training on how to observe people and bodies, and through coaching, through somatic awareness, like all this stuff too. That's like deeply embedded within my system for sure.
I would love to, like, if you're open to, I'd love to know about like that workshop you went to, like what that experience was like. Cause you said that was your first, or
it was my first like actual in-person workshop on the topic. I had explored a variety of different things in this realm beforehand, but I'd never gone to a workshop before.
Okay.
I'm so sorry to the person who led this. I don't remember your name, but if I remember it, I'll put a link to you in the show notes. So one of the things we went into for a little while was exploring with and playing with the Dom sub dynamic itself and the actual Dom sub relationship. And everybody there got a chance to be in a Dom position and also a sub position to feel what it felt like. And so to give an example of one of the things we did, which was so, so cool and profound, and it might sound simple while you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube, but we didn't touch each other at all. We were paired up with people, and one person was the Dom first, the other person was the sub first, and non-verbally, we were supposed to Dom, I'll be in the Dom role as I tell this story. Okay. We were supposed to Dom them and have them move their body just by us using our eyes. And so I had my person, I had the sub who I was working with get down on the ground and roll over, and just through eye motions and head movements, I had them move their body in a variety of different ways. And it wasn't sexual. It was just playing with the Dom sub dynamic at that point. And I had them stand back up. And it was a really interesting exploration of how connected I needed to be with them in that moment to stay tuned, because I could tell that they were constantly tracking me to see what my desires were. And there was this really beautiful connection in that moment that it was palpable and super fun in the Dom role. And then I noticed when I was in the sub role and I got to go through that same experience, that there was a release that I got to experience, because I didn't have to control anything. I didn't have to make sure they were okay or do any caretaking. I just got to follow whatever they told me to do. And there was a nice, a deep nervous system relaxation, especially for me, who's somebody who's like, go, create, produce, usually in the role of Dom in some way of that word in life. It's very useful for me.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I love hearing about the experience where you got to try something that you probably have not tried before, and doing it in a space where others were also with you who are curious and wanting to explore as well. And that's part of all of this is just getting out there and being curious and going to a workshop or hiring a professional, and not needing to be like aficionado right off the bat, but always open to what can come. Like you mentioned how, like, while you might be generally in a top or dom space in your life, whether it be in the bedroom or in just general life, that you also switch roles in that workshop so that you can see what it feels like to be on the other end. For instance, tonight I have a shibari rigger who I'm mentoring under to get better at my shibari skills, and she's coming to tie me up and suspend me. And never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined that would be something that I put myself into willingly as the one desiring that in a dynamic. But this is a way that I get to now, before I start suspending anyone, see what it feels like. Like, see what it's like on the other end, because then you have a real appreciation for what it is that you're asking people to do or to go into with you. And there's varying, like, forms of thought. Some people might say, oh, you don't need to do that. It's not a requirement. If you're a dom, you can just stay a dom. You don't need to put yourself in that role, which I respect as well. And I feel like there's ways that you get to expand yourself even more by just dipping your toe there.
Yeah. Maybe not a requirement, but it's hard for me to see how you wouldn't become a better dom by going through an experience of being a sub.
I couldn't agree more.
I don't know how it would not help you.
Right.
It makes me think of the first time a girlfriend of mine like penetrated me anally with her finger. It was a shocking moment. It brought up emotions and all kinds of stuff for me. And I was like, holy shit, this is what I've been doing to women my whole life.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really changed my perspective on penetration.
Oh yeah. My partner, she pegged me, I don't know, maybe 5-6 months ago. This was our first experience together doing so. And ever since that time, I have a greater appreciation for any time that I'm anally penetrating someone.
Yeah.
Because now I get to feel and understand the sensation rather than just like, here I am, the one inserting. I'm now receiving and getting to see what that feels like. So have a greater appreciation for the ones receiving, knowing how to move slower, knowing how to, relax the body to open more, all of these things. But I would not have had as much appreciation if I didn't go into that experience. And may I say, if you've never been pegged as a man, check it out. It's a really beautiful experience.
Yeah. So let's do a little pegging segue, and then I want to talk about, I'm making a little note here.
Okay.
I've been pegged too by my partner. I found it was a deeply pleasurable experience, also very vulnerable up front, also very eye-opening as to how intensive the process was to actually open my body to her in that way, but really sexy to lay on my back and receive that while she's like up on top of me, facing me with her breasts in my face. Like what an interesting experience that I couldn't even it's nothing like, it was like nothing I could have ever imagined being a younger version of me.
Yeah. I get totally.
It was totally mind blowing. And so last year I did a big survey asking many hundreds of people, men and women, around their experiences with anal. And I asked a lot of associated questions with it was a big survey study. And there were a lot of guys who had been pegged. And one of the most interesting pieces of information that came out of that whole survey for me was that I was able to cross-reference different data points. And I saw that heterosexual men who have been pegged by their female partners on average made substantially more money throughout their life than men who had never experienced being pegged before. And I'm talking about heterosexual men here, which is mind blowing, right? Like I didn't make those statistics up. It's a little mind blowing to me. And so, yes, one could make the argument, okay, well, there's a very specific sample that would respond to a survey around anal pleasure, of course. But even still, it leaves some questions to be opened and or to be asked.
And new rituals to be brought into my relationship with my partner. Make that a weekly thing. See that money just go up and up.
Two of the theories. One is that, if a man is really open-minded enough to try a variety of things, he's probably more open-minded and flexible enough to try a variety of things with his business and his life in general, to try things outside of the box, to see if they work or not.
Yeah.
Another person said, it's because their root, if we're using the term root chakra, is more open. And that has a lot to do with your feelings of stability and survival and that sort of thing. Some people might like that word, or the word root chakra. Some people might not. But if you've ever been pegged or explored anal penetration and it has gone well, you'll know that there's this sort of embodied openness and expansion that I have felt after those experiences. That's kind of beyond the typical, that just sexually feels good. Like every time my girlfriend has penetrated me there, I feel more expanded and more stable and more vital and grounded in general. Outside of any new age style words, but those words are the words that are associated with the root chakra too.
Beautiful.
So very interesting crossover.
Yeah. And I think you talked about segue. I think that's a good segue, talking about like the sexual experience, that one of the misconceptions I believe that I see often is that people believe BDSM always or must incorporate some form of like penetrative sexual experience, intercourse, however you want to call it. And while that can be a beautiful addition to the experience, it's actually not the goal. I've been in many scenes with personally as well as professionally where there was no form of penetration or even interaction with the male or female genitalia. And that allows more openness and safety for individuals who are wanting to maybe, try this out, but are afraid to go into a, penetrative experience, or might not want to do that with a particular practitioner who's, touts himself as a dom or a top, that you can actually receive so much, fun, juicy, sexy experiencing in this that doesn't involve sex or penetration.
Yeah, hugely important. Like the workshop I talked about, we didn't even touch each other, and we entered into a really powerful, pleasurable dom sub type dynamic.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. So let's talk about the B in the BDSM just for a moment. Bondage.
Okay.
That's a word that brings stuff up for people.
Yeah.
What is bondage to you? Like, how would you define that?
Yeah. I see bondage as any form of contact with a body that like precludes them from being able to move in a way that they would necessarily do so free of their own free will. So you don't have to use ropes, but ropes are a big one that are incorporated. Someone taking their hands and placing them on yours and putting you against a wall, you are now in a bonded experience. Saran wrap, like you can go to your kitchen and find all sorts of fun BDSM tools, but you can take saran wrap and safely, I would not recommend over any breathing holes, unless you've agreed upon that, can be mummified. And now you're tightly held, or someone coming up and like holding you tightly with their body so that you're now pressed against them or having their weight on top of you. All of these are ways that you're now being held against what would normally be your free will of movement. So that's kind of where bondage comes in. And there's a lot of other places you can go with that as well.
Got it.
Yeah.
What about dynamics where I tell somebody they can't move until I give them permission? Another form of bondage?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just without physical touch.
Yeah.
And what about the M in BDSM?
So if we talk about masochism, then we'll also talk about sadism as well, because in a way they kind of mirror each other. They go hand in hand. They don't always have to. But when we talk about masochist or masochism, we're talking about someone who derives some form of physical, emotional pleasure from receiving some form of pain. And pain does not have to, again, be physical. It could be degradation. It could be humiliation, like someone verbally saying something to you, and that could be painful for you. But by receiving that, being told that you're a bad girl, or being degraded to a point where you're nothing but like scum on the floor, if that elicits a response in you that is now like a turn on, and you feel warm and flush and parts of your body are starting to be electrified from that, then you might have masochistic tendencies or identify as masochist. The other side of the coin is sadist, and that is someone who derives some form of pleasure from inflicting pain. Again, can be verbal, non-physical, or physical. And there's something about the way that you get to slap someone's, butt and watch it turn red or raw, and that brings out a charge in you that is now like this sexual power that you haven't been able to tap into before. You might be a sadist.
Yeah.
And you can play with both. But all of this, again, with consent, with safety.
Right.
Yeah.
you don't want to just surprise somebody and give them a really fucking powerful slap
Yeah.
in the middle of sex without talking about it. That's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. That's where you get in trouble. So that's why I keep repeating, because, we're definitely in a world where you have more access to information, where it's a lot harder to hide, where you have technology at your fingertips, and it's very easy for you to be, if you're a practitioner in this world, canceled for not being appropriate. Or if you're not doing something appropriately or properly, you can now, that will be out in the world for a lot of people to see.
Right.
So as you should have been careful before technology was the way it is today, you have to be even more careful how quickly these things can spread.
Yeah, for sure. Have to be more careful. Also, just there is inherent value in being more careful as well.
Absolutely.
Too.
Yeah.
And now we're in a territory where if a simple slip up, an accident can be turned into a weaponized thing too, which is a whole other tangent conversation that we could save for another podcast. But as you were speaking of the M, can you say the word again?
Masochist.
Masochist.
Or masochism.
I always want to mispronounce that, but masochism. Yeah. I'm thinking of the stories I've heard of really high level CEOs who pay to have a dom like throw them on the floor and stomp on them and say like, you're a piece of shit. Meanwhile, they're making $50 million a year, controlling an entire organization, you know, and that's what lights them up because they're so in control all the time. They need to experience the opposite.
Yes.
And it really gives them life.
Yeah. Yeah. Or that same CEO might give someone their credit card and say, go spend my money. And I want you to tell me all the things you're buying and how you're just using me for my money and draining me of all my assets and how I'm such a piece of crap for doing so.
Yeah.
And that is a huge turn on to some people. So what you said, like people who are generally in some form of power within their life will find ways to escape that and will usually go to someone, whether it's a personal like experience or a professional, to now have that power taken away.
Yeah.
Because it gives them a break, and then vice versa as well.
Is that a money sub? Is that the term for that? Some people listening might be like, holy shit, there are people who will just give you their credit card and say, spend my money.
Yeah.
How do I find these people?
Yeah. I mean, FetLife is a great place to find almost anything. Obviously approach with caution because you will see everything on FetLife.
Yeah.
But if there is something that if you're listening, if there's something you've been curious about, or something that maybe you've felt some like shame around, or judging yourself or judgment from others, you're not alone. And there's a good chance that whatever it is that you are desiring or that is bringing you pleasure, that there's someone else out there who is also enjoying that or who would really enjoy providing that experience for you. Totally. So don't hold yourself back from wanting to open yourself up to this world. It's what I love most about it is it's a very conscious space where you get to show up as who you are and be held in a really beautiful community of people who will celebrate you for your kinks and desires rather than shame you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks for saying that. I get asked a lot of questions as being a sex educator. And one of the most common things that people follow up their questions with is another question where they say, is that normal? Like, I like this. I want to experience this. Is that normal? ... You know, and people, just like you said, like people are just afraid to express their desires and talk about them because there's so much taboo and our society is fucked around all this stuff. But the reality is, there are people out there who will share desires.
Are we allowed to swear? Man, I wanted to swear like 9 times.
Yeah, totally. Fuck shit. Pussy,
Balls.
ass, dick. Like we can say all the things on this podcast. Okay. I always check the explicit box.
Good.
I wanted to share a tool this around impact play. I learned this, actually co-opted it from a friend who was a massage therapist who was having some people be demo receivers for his students in his class around pressure. Maybe you already know this scale, but sometimes in the moment of slapping somebody or being slapped, it can be hard to say, oh, just a little bit more pressure or just a little bit less pressure. There are a lot of words there.
Yeah.
So the tool that he used in his massage class was where you can use a scale of 1 to 10 for pressure. And 7 is the ideal pressure. And so if somebody slaps you and it's not hard enough, maybe you say, oh, it's a 4. Maybe they slap you harder, you say it's a 5. Slap you harder, it's a 6. And then they slap you really hard because they're trying to really meet your needs. And then you're like, oh shit, ouch. And then you say a 9. And then they know immediately to come back down again a little bit.
Yeah.
And get to the 7.
That's a great tool. It's in that like example, a scene could be, I want to get to a 7. I don't want to go any higher. And checking in on as you're spanking, flogging, however the impact is going, to say, okay, where are you at right now? Yeah. Like you said, you can also do that without numbers. You can do that with hand gestures. You can do that with body movement. Like if you're wanting more, you might arch your back. If you're wanting less or it's becoming too intense, you can kind of do the cat pose. But yes, that's an important scale, because if you're just hitting someone and then expecting them to just know when you're going to stop, this is where, again, conversation is really important. But I'm glad that you learned about that as well. Yeah,
just thought I'd throw in some practical stuff. I like the arching of the back thing and the unarching of the back, and it just makes me think of, wow, you can get so creative with this.
Absolutely.
Come up with so many different ways to explore intimacy.
And also when you're going, we talked about the subspace or like the bottom drop. We talked about the times when you might be having an out of body experience or dissociating. You might not have words. It might be, or you might have a gag in your mouth because that's part of the experience. You really can't say a number when you've got something in your mouth or you're having an out of body experience. So having these secondary or tertiary means of communicating with each other is really important. Hands are a big one. Like if you're in a troublesome space or you don't have your words, like it could be making a fist or making an okay sign saying that you're okay. But you should go beyond just words, because oftentimes when I'm working with someone, they lose their words. There's kind of this deadpan thing that happens, and it's knowing how to check in with them and also not take them out of the experience.
Totally.
Because when we are using our words in some form or fashion, we're using our brain, and now wherever we were, could be miles away, and in this place of like extreme like pleasure and elation, we've now, kind of taken them out of that space, so to speak. So, body actions are vitally important to also have in the safety conversation that you're having.
Yeah. I love that. And again, it's reinforcing for me that there's almost this BDSM light and then, and then BDSM thing. And there are things we can explore on our own, but then to get the real potential of pleasure and connection that's possible in these realms, like it would be useful to take a training or read a book or to actually do some study about this stuff to understand all the different potentials and options that are out there. Because even just having this conversation, my mind is getting blown a little bit like, wow, you could do so much.
Yeah. And because you can do so much, there might be some form of expectation or pressure to say, I'm supposed to do it all, or I'm supposed to be into it all. And I'm here to tell you right now, there's a lot of things that are just way outside my comfort zone that I will not even venture into.
Yeah.
Like needle play. Yes, literally taking hypodermic needles and puncturing skin. That is things that people enjoy. I don't have that skill set, and I don't have a desire, at least in this point in my life, in my training, to go down that road.
Yeah.
And that's completely okay. And I think it's also important to mention that you don't want to go outside of your knowledge base either. If someone's like, oh, can you tie me up? I'm like, yeah, sure. I'll go watch a YouTube video and I've learned this, and yeah, now I'll do it. Well, these can be dangerous, experiences that you're going into with people. Yeah. So knowing your limitations, I know for myself, there's areas that I feel very skilled at and can do in my sleep, ones that I feel very comfortable with, but might want some practice in. And I'll share that. I'll share that with someone I'm going into with, like, I've done this 4 or 5 times, so I'm still learning. And that allows me to like not have to like perform in a way where I'm now uncomfortable or not sure how to hold the space. And that person knows very well if this person messes up or isn't doing it the way that I've seen on TV or the way that this other practitioner did it, it's okay because they're just learning.
Right.
But you don't want to go into something that you don't have skill set in, like generally, and then also don't feel like you have to be pressured into going into all the different avenues of, like you said, BDSM light, and then whatever the other side of that is. There's going to be someone who is always going to have a darker, kinkier side or have more pain tolerance than you. And your goal isn't to try to match that person. It's trying to have your own experience that makes you feel super embodied and super powerful.
Yeah. Boom.
Bam.
That I kind of want to end there, but I do want to say this one other piece about being tied up, because I think it's so important that there are, like, I have heard stories of people trying that and then actually giving their partner who they tied up like nerve damage for years, trying some shibari stuff that they saw online. Yes. And then it's like, oh, now their partner's hand doesn't work anymore.
It's a real thing.
In the same way. So it's like actually really serious, especially when you involve restraints and tying people up. So like training, super crucially important.
Yeah. And there are people who've been doing shibari for years. I mean, I know a practitioner who's been doing this for years, and they mentioned how not that long ago they were being tied and they had nerve damage in their arm that didn't allow them to use their arm properly for a few months. And luckily it came back, but that's not always the case. So always go into these elements with curiosity and a healthy respect for all the things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
You have an idea already of the things that can, go well and be beautiful and awesome, but really focusing on the other side of that and knowing how to take care of that is vitally important. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah. So when's your next workshop?
Well, I'm luckily going to be taking some time off for the
Nice.
summer and going traveling overseas. But yeah, definitely in the fall. I'm planning on doing one in Mexico City sometime in the fall as well. But hosting what would be, I did the 101, the 201, or will be sometime in the fall as well.
Nice. And for anybody else who is listening who maybe just wants to get their feet wet or start learning about this somehow, what directions would you show them?
Yeah, I would say YouTube is a great resource. It's a great resource, and taking a look at like the number of views and the comments to see if the person who's providing the information is coming from a place of having good general knowledge, because anyone can go on YouTube and start up a channel and start talking about something and claim that they're an expert and can actually do more harm than good. But there's a lot of really great YouTubers out there that bring some really good knowledge. Books. There's the new topping book, the new bottoming book, the ultimate guide to kink and BDSM. These are great books that give you just a whole wide world of these topics that we're talking about very briefly in this podcast. Mm-hmm. And it's a place where you get to start and just like, again, dip your toe. Going to Munches. So Munches is a meetup. It sounds like lunch, but it's with an M. And these are meetups where people talk about, kink. They talk about BDSM. And as long as you have more than a few thousand people in your city or town, there's a good chance you're going to run into people who are interested in this. So going to talk about it and being very honest to say, I'm new. This is my first time coming to this. I have no idea what I'm doing. I would say one of the greatest like joys or even kinks that people who are experienced in BDSM have is being able to take on a new mentee or to show someone this beautiful world and this path. And because when you can get someone where it's earlier and they're now being held in a way that feels safe and consensual, they're going to want to come back and do more.
Yeah.
If their first experience is not consensual, it's traumatic and dangerous, there's a good chance that you might have lost them forever.
Yeah. Andre, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really awesome and eye-opening and mind-blowing. And yeah, just grateful for your time. And
Thank you, my friend.
where can people find you?
They can find me in Asheville. I also travel, but I have a website, which is coming-closer.com. And then on Instagram, probably not my best medium that I use for social media, but Coming Closer with Andre. And we talk about BDSM dynamics, kink, open relationships. But yeah, find me in Asheville. Come check out this beautiful city.
Yeah, it's a good spot.
Yeah.
It's a good spot. Thank you so much, man. We'll put all those links in the show notes. And if you're listening, thank you for being here. If you have any comments, questions for the future, or requests for the future, leave a comment below if this is on YouTube, or shoot me an email and let me know, and I'll get back to you, and I'll see you next time.